Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another fabulous evening for York Observatory YouTube TeleTube. We have a very fun broadcast lined up for you tonight. And just as a reminder, you are watching the online astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. I'm Professor Elena Hyde, and I'm really thrilled to be broadcasting to you tonight live from the Alan I. Carswell Observatory at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Just as a reminder, we do broadcast every Wednesday night live from 7:30 p.m. local Toronto time here on our YouTube channel. That's York U Observatory Live. If you have missed a broadcast, you will always be able to catch it on the replay in our playlists for live stream. And just as a little introduction today, before we get started, I'd just like to give a call out. If you have heard, we are in fact running the Mars the Mars opposition event this week, upcoming week. So that's October 3rd, 6th, and then we'll be running 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. So if you are interested in tuning in for Mars opposition later, those will be 8 to 10 p.m. on every one of those nights. We'll be trying to show live images, of course, weather allowing. It is cloudy tonight. So unfortunately, we will not be able to show live images from the 1 meter telescope at the start of this broadcast. However, I will be able to send you over to one of our wonderful presenters, or well, I should say interviewers a little bit tonight, because we actually have a guest speaker for the first time in the history of TeleTube. So I'm joined tonight by several of our students and Shannon, Gagan, Matt, as well as, of course, our actual guest this evening, Professor Jesse Rogerson. Now, Matt, I believe you are up for a quick intro and overview of tonight.
Well, yes. Hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt, and I'm here with Gagan and Shannon, live from the Alan I. Carswell Observatory at York University. So tonight we've got a great presentation about ancient sites and solar alignments by no other than Professor Jesse Rogerson from York University. Glad to have you here, Professor.
Indeed, we are very lucky to have Professor Rogerson here with us. Professor Rogerson, if you would like to go ahead and put on your video as well, I'll go ahead and set up your introduction here. So, of course, I've got the unenviable task of trying to recap some of your achievements. But we're very lucky to have Professor Rogerson here tonight. He did a BSc at McMaster University and Department of Physics and Astronomy, went on to a PhD at York Department of Physics and Astronomy, which some of us here over at the Ellen A. Carswell Observatory are intimately familiar with. And Professor Rogerson actually used to be a volunteer member of the observatory back in the day. So very, very fun. Of course, now Professor Rogerson is an assistant professor here at York in the Division of Natural Sciences, and his research focuses on quasars, which unfortunately we're not going to talk about tonight, but they are supermassive black holes actively consuming material, which are, of course, found at the centers of distant galaxies. He's also an active science communicator and interested in education and public outreach. He teaches the history of astronomy, so that you might imagine some of this material comes in there, as well as exploration of the solar system and other astronomy-related courses. So it is wonderful to have you here tonight, Professor Rogerson. Thank you very much for joining us. And I suppose, take it away.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for that introduction. It's great to hear all that stuff. I guess you don't realize how long it's been. And you got all the way back to my McMaster days where I started. So that's cool. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for that introduction. I'm glad to be the first one. I didn't realize that I was the first one. And this is the Wednesday night observing sessions that would normally be the Wednesday night in person if it wasn't COVID-19 times. So I'm happy to be back because I loved going to those. So I'll just share my screen to get the presentation up. Continue. There we go. Okay, so can everybody see that okay? I think
Yeah, you look great. And this is a reminder to our live audience as well. As Professor Rogerson is giving his talk, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat on YouTube, and we will relay those questions at the end of the talk, however many there is time for.
All right, cool. So yeah, let's get this show on the road. So ancient sites and solar alignments. Obviously, there's the famous Stonehenge there in the background. This is it's content from a course that I teach, History of Astronomy. And it goes way back. So when you want to talk about the history of astronomy, the study of the night sky, right? Astronomy is the study of the night sky, and you want to go way, way, way back to before there was even written languages, before there was. Before we were writing things down, before we were telling stories through books or through anything like that, before written languages, before any, we would call this prehistoric times. And so we're going to go way back to as far back as we can see, and see what evidence there is in the archaeological studies that point to humans having a really strong grasp of the astronomical sky. So that is sort of a working definition of archaeoastronomy. Archaeoastronomy being the study of ancient peoples, ancient sites, ancient artifacts, and their connections to astronomical events or astronomical alignments in some way. So I have a lot of cool stuff to show and not a ton of time to do it. So I'm just going to dive right in, and I'm going to say, well, let's start with this. And this is the movement of the sun. Okay, so we get it. There's some pretty simple patterns that the sun has. I mean, we all know that the sun is gone at nighttime, and during the day it's up nice and high in the sky. And that movement is from east to west, right? The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, and that happens once every 24 hours. And we have a really good working feel for that. You don't even really have to, you've never had to have taken a science course. You would never have had to done any real observations. All you need to do is live on this planet, and you'll notice that the sun does this east to west motion. But there's some more interesting patterns that the sun does that aren't as obvious on a day-to-day basis. And that's this one. So this is an image taken from a hilltop over a little city in Greece. And what you have on here it's the same view, but with a time lapse, 3 images spliced together from the same view that show the rising sun on 3 different dates throughout the year. So we have the rising sun here on the summer solstice, the rising sun on the equinox in March, the rising sun on the winter solstice, and then back to the equinox again. So these are four times throughout the year where you have these specific times. And this astrophotographer, has gone and seen the rising sun on those days. Now, what's obvious to you right now is that you can see the sun is not rising in the same spot every day. The sun rises in a different spot. And there's a very obvious pattern that goes along with it. And if you were to go start on the summer solstice, say you started on the summer solstice, which is June, in the Northern Hemisphere, we call the summer solstice June 21st. And you took a photo, then that would be the sun. But the next day, it would start creeping along the horizon. It would start moving towards a certain direction. In fact, from the summer solstice, it starts moving towards the due east. And eventually it'll keep going till you get to a point where it is in this exact due east position when it's rising. And that is a day we call the equinox. And then if you keep watching it over and over and watch the sunrise every day, it creeps along the horizon, and then it'll start rising at its furthest point to the south of east. And that's the winter solstice. And so there's pattern, and it keeps going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on that horizon. And that takes a year. It takes 365 days for it to do the full pattern. And we're going to dive into some ancient sites that really show some interesting stuff. So these are the 3 places we're going to go to. We're going to look at Newgrange, Stonehenge, and the sun daggers of Chaco Canyon. Stonehenge is a very famous place, but these other ones might not be as famous, might not be what you have seen before. So let's start with Newgrange. So here's Newgrange. This is a reconstruction, actually. It wasn't like this when it was quote unquote rediscovered. It was under a pile of like debris, and there was trees and overgrowth, and they'd cleared it all away, and it was rebuilt. It was rebuilt based on what they think it was like, but there are still some small disagreements over exactly what the reconstruction was. But nevertheless, the main story will stand, and you'll see. excuse me. So the Newgrange here was constructed roughly 3200 BCE. So that's 5,000 years ago. And it actually makes it older than the pyramids in Egypt, the Great Pyramids, and Stonehenge. It's quite large. Oh, and this is the location. There it is right there in Ireland. It's very, very large. And you can see there's a group of people right there representing how big it is. And you can see if I put a hockey rink next to it, because I'm a Canadian and I love hockey. That hockey rink, you can see just how big this site is. And we can do this. This is a zoomed up. So you can see the people standing in front, and it's quite tall. It's very, very tall. And we're gonna focus on one specific thing, the entrance and the roof box. So this is a stone that's sitting right in front of the entrance. So there's the door behind it going into Newgrange. And so that's the doorway. And above here is called the roof box. And we're gonna get to the roof box in a second. If you take a cross section of the Newgrange site, this is what you would see. So there's the door right there on the right. There's the door, and there's a long column, a long walkway that you go through, and it enters into this 3-roomed chamber. So at the end of the thing, this is about, I don't know, 15 meters or so down a pathway, and then you have this chamber on the inside with 3 inlets, 3 rooms there. And you can see that there's these stone pieces that sit there. And actually, this is a better image here that shows. So this is from inside the chamber. In the image A there, you're standing right at the very back wall and you're looking straight across the chamber. So that right there is the exit out. So outside, and you can't see any light coming from it right now. So you're down sort of a windy pathway. This is from position B on here. So you're just inside the door and you're looking into the chamber. And this is the really interesting one. So you can see there's the 3 rooms of the chamber, and there's these stone pedestals, stone things. They're actually, if you get a close look at them, they're almost bowl-like. They're sort of rounded bowl-like things, and on which archaeologists believe that human remains were put. So what this represents is a tomb. This is a tomb where people of importance, or maybe someone who ran things for the group that lived in this area 5,000 years ago, this is where they were entombed. The remains are not there anymore, but that's what they believe it was for. The interesting thing is what happens on a very specific day. So this is the side view of the Newgrange, and this is a top view of the Newgrange. And on the winter solstice, on the day where the sun is lowest in the sky, where it spends the least amount of time in the sky, the direction of the roof box, that hole above the door, points directly towards the rising sun, such that right when it rises, the light goes right down the pathway, perfectly aligned right down the pathway, so that the light hits the back of the chamber, that chamber where those people were entombed. And for about 17 minutes after the sun rises on the winter solstice, on the shortest day of the year, that entombed area gets some sunlight. And there's some really interesting cultural things you can put to this. The idea that the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year represents, societies sometimes represent that as a way of guarding the sun. So the sun is at its weakest, it's lowest in the sky, it's its shortest day. Let's guard that sunlight. Let's protect it as it grows towards the warmer months. And another relationship that they think is attributed to this is that the people who were buried there, who were entombed there, this is a way of capturing the light for them and helping them keeping them strong in those weakest moments of the year. So there's a lot of religious and cultural practices that were attempted to be carried out with this alignment. But the fact that the people of Newgrange were able to perfectly line up that light box and that alleyway that goes down to the tomb, such that on the shortest day of the year at sunrise, the light would illuminate the back chamber, means they had a very strong working knowledge of the pathway of the sun, not just the east to west motion, but the entire pathway or the entire pattern throughout the year. Okay, so that's one. Let's get on to Fayada Butte. All right, so this is Fayada Butte. I know it's a rock formation. A butte is a rock formation that stands up sharply out of a plateau. It is in North America. It's in Albuquerque, or just northwest of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it is the site of the ancestral Puebloans, and they lived in this area sometime between 850 and 1150 CE. So this was about like 1,000 years ago or so. And these people were incredibly advanced. They had these huge cities. So this is what's left over in the archaeological site in one of the places in the canyon, and it represents a city. And this is an artist depiction of what it was probably like at the time. And it's like hundreds of rooms. It's like this massive city cultural center. But if you go look around the canyon and other places, there's a whole bunch of stuff. But this is the really interesting site. It's called the 3 Slab site. It's on top of the Fallada Butte. So you can see that from this image, there's not much up there. It's the top of a mountain basically. And there's these 3 rocks that are sitting there. We can zoom in on it, these slabs. So there's the slabs. The 3 Slab site is what it's called. Just to give you a sense of the dimensions. So these things are 2 or 3 meters tall. So they're taller than a human. And they're quite heavy. Like these things are, thousands of pounds, very, very heavy rocks. What's interesting about this site, okay, is that if you look underneath it, so you can see through the cracks here, there's a crack there and there's another crack between the rocks. There's a crack there and another crack there between the rocks, the 3 rocks. There's these 2 slits. If you went beneath it, you would see this. So you can see up through the slits, and you see the blue sky and the sunlight coming through, and the sunlight is shone onto the rock underneath. It makes sense. The sun's just going through a crack. But you also see there's a petroglyph here. There's a carving on the rock underneath. And it looks like this. This is what the drawing actually looks like. So there's a big spiral and a little spiral to the upper left of it. Here's what some researchers have found by studying this site over a long period of time. On the summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, the day when the sun is highest in the sky, when it spends the longest amount of time in the sky, at noon, the sunlight that's going through those 2 slits perfectly creates a line right down the middle of the bigger spiral. The large spiral has this, what we call a sun dagger. It looks kind of like a dagger. It has that shape of a dagger going right through the petroglyph. But the researchers stuck around and they watched it more often. And if they went on the winter solstice, the day when it's shortest in the shortest day of the year, as we talked for the groups at Newgrange, then the daggers are perfectly perfectly on both sides, encapsulating that spiral. And on the equinoxes, which happen twice a year, March and September, it creates 2 daggers, one large one that's just to the right of the center of the large one. But then there's a little one that goes right up to that, perfectly lands on that smaller spiral. And so what you're looking at here is a shrine that marks the important parts of the sun's cycle. Now, an interesting question that you might have immediately is, did they actually build this? Did they take these rocks and position them in such a way on the top of this big mountain in order to make this happen? And the answer to that is probably no. That the site looks like, and based on other rock falls in the area, it looks like the rocks fell off the side of through natural erosion and then landed in this weird configuration. And the ancestral Puebloans who lived in the area spent enough time on the top of this Fallada Butte with this incredible view of the surrounding area and noticed the way the patterns were on those specific days, which means the ancestral Puebloans had an incredibly good working knowledge. They knew exactly when the solstice was at noon. They knew exactly when the winter solstice at noon was, and they knew exactly the noon times for the spring and fall equinoxes. And they looked at the light that was going through the rocks on that day at that time, and then drew carved the carving into that position so that it would hit those specific alignments. And finally, we'll get to the Stonehenge. Okay, Stonehenge is, some people, you could have visited these other sites as well, but this one is one that I think a lot more people talk about. I personally have never visited any of these sites, but I would love to at some point. Stonehenge is in the south of England. So there it is right down there in just outside of Salisbury. And Stonehenge has a long history. It's been around for a while. So the earliest construction was probably something like 3100 BCE. So just after Newgrange, which was 3200 BCE. Just after Newgrange, a group of people in this area dug the outer ditches. So there's the size here, this big, huge round circle, which is the ditches that go around the stones that we see now. That ditch was dug, and it left two important features in this circle. Was this entranceway to the, if you see the compass here, entranceway to the northeast, and then in the south there was an entranceway here. There were some post holes, and I mean, I could get into a million details about Stonehenge. It has like a 4,000-year history, but we're not going to get into it. The point to keep in mind is that it was built by several different people over many thousands of years. So it is much larger than a hockey rink. So it's a little bit, these ditches are larger than Newgrange. Now, if you fast forward a few thousand years, the group that built the original ditches probably didn't live there anymore, and a new group was in the area, and they added to it, and it gets to, and that happened probably a few times. And now we get to what we see now, and this is the configuration that we see now, where the ditch is still there, the remnants of the ditch is still there, and I'll show you an aerial view in a second. But all the rocks have been added, and they're really interesting features. And of importance is what's called the heel stone, which is up here. One really interesting fact is the large stones. So here's the aerial view. These large stones, the big tall ones, are called the Sarsen stones, and they were transported from probably about 35 kilometers away. These things they weigh as much as 5 elephants. They're incredibly, incredibly big, incredibly heavy, which is just a testament to the people. They're saying this site is so important to us that we're going to drag rocks that weigh 22,000 pounds across 32 kilometers, 35 kilometers. It's incredible. And right up at the top there's the heel stone right next to the highway now that's going by. So, and another interesting fact, and I'm running out of time, I think, is there's littler stones that you can't quite see as easily here. There's the little stones right there. They came from over 200 kilometers away. So this site was very important. So the heel stone. On the summer solstice, when the sun has marched as far as it's going to along the up to the northeast horizon, on the sunrise of the summer solstice, the sunrise, if you're standing in the middle of the stones, like right inside the middle of Stonehenge, and you're looking towards the heel stone, so this is the heel stone here, then you will see the sunrise directly over top of it. And you can see in this picture how it can look almost aurora-like. There's the nice, it's backlit, and it has this, the sun is coming up, and it looks almost like a torch when it gets above it. But a really interesting feature that we were able to figure out now, thousands of years later, is that it didn't actually look exactly like this back when it was built. So let me explain. So this is just a sort of the same image, and you can see, I'll explain in a second, but there's an image on top. And I just said that on the summer solstice at sunrise, if you're inside the Stonehenge looking at the heel stone, the sun will rise directly over top. And you get this feature here where the sun looks like it makes a torch or something. But because we are able to send time backwards in simulations, we can predict where everything was on the sky thousands of years ago or thousands of years in the future because of our understanding of the orbits of things and how the Earth moves. And there's this process called the precession of the equinoxes, or axial precession of the Earth. We don't have time to get into it, but what it really means is that thousands of years ago, when Stonehenge was originally built, when that pathway pointing towards northeast was carved by the original builders, the sun wasn't rising directly over that heel stone. It was rising just to the left of the heel stone. So this is what it would have looked like when it was built. When the heel stone was put in position, it would have been just to the left of it. And that's kind of weird. That's a really odd feature. But if you take into account the precession of the equinoxes, that they meant to put it there. They meant to put it just to the left. And that's a confusing thing. But if you look at what we think the Stonehenge looked like in completion, so this is what it probably looked like when all the stones were there. And this is it today with many, many stones missing. That you can make an assumption, or you can make the guess that there was probably or potentially another heel stone that right there that what would you call, framed the sun on the summer solstice rising. So on the summer solstice, when it was rising, the sun would be framed by two large heel stones. And that kind of makes sense for a number of reasons. There's other alignments with, say, the sun on this side, on the December solstice, but the idea that it's about archways, and there's these big archways in the center here, that they would create an archway for the rising sun on the summer solstice. So I think I've hit roughly what I'm supposed to do. And these are the three sites, Newgrange, Stonehenge, and Sundagger that I talked about. And these are just three places from a multitude of archaeological sites around the world that show that even thousands of years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, humans had a really strong working knowledge of the pathway of the sun, the patterns of the sun. And what I would say, and like why you would do this is two reasons. One is pragmatically. So if you are learning to cultivate the land, if you are becoming an agricultural society, which we were, then the sun is so clearly tied to how your plants grow, how your food grows. It's so important to you because if you have strong sunlight during the summer, you get lots of crops, and you have weak sunlight and cold temperatures, then you have no crops. They're frozen, depending on where you are. So if you want to have a really strong crop or really good farming practices, you need to understand the sun. You need to know when it's best to plant. On top of that, it's not just about growing things. It's so clearly tied to survival in so many ways. The sun is what makes the days warm. When it's in the summer months, it's incredibly warm and it keeps us safe. When it's down, it's dark, which is more dangerous. And when it's cold, it's more dangerous. So the ancient culture has not only used it for pragmatic reasons, but it deeply connected to our cultural practices and our religious practices. And there's a lot of evidence that shows from all of these sites that celestial objects like the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars were deified. They were given godlike personalities, and their movements through the sun would therefore be godlike pathways. And understanding those pathways and trying to appease these gods, trying to pray to these gods, became an integral part of these ancient societies, as likely connected to these cultural practices, but also their farming practices as they deified their sun. So I think that's where I'll leave it. I think I went way over 15 minutes, but hopefully that's not so bad. And I guess let's do some questions.
Wonderful. Shall we maybe leave these up just for a little while, just in case anyone has questions on a particular slide? So we do have a couple questions from our chat area that we might want to brush through really quick. It looks like we have a question posted earlier by Harrison just about Newgrange. How much of it was discovered intact versus reconstructed, and is the interior original? So like, could you go in there and see some original?
That is an incredible question, Harrison. I am going to, so you can still see that. Okay, wait, I have some more slides that I want to show, if I can find them. Oh no, I took them out. Okay, I took them out. That's all right. Okay, so here's what I'll say about that. So the alleyway, what do you call that? The pathway into the tomb, to the inner chamber, that's all original. And most importantly, the ceiling, so this ceiling right here, is probably, it's the original like constructed roof with that dirt was placed on top of and grass was grown on top of. That is probably the oldest roofed structure on the planet. Now I can't guarantee that. I'm not actually an archaeologist, I'm an astronomer, but it is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, roofed structure on the planet. But I wish I had some images. If you Google Newgrange and you look around, you'll find some really great images of the archaeological expeditions that were uncovering it. And the thing just looked like an overgrown patch of forest, and like there was trees and there was massive grasses and stuff. And they had to dig out this, like the roof box here, this whole area was under rubble and dirt and rocks and stuff. And they had to dig it all out. And all of these stones around here which are called the curbstones, of which the front entrance right here, that's a curbstone. Those were all awry and they had to be moved back and stuff. So there was movements in the ground, and there was stuff was destroyed. I mean, it's thousands of years ago that this was in use. So yeah, it was its reconstruction is what we think it was, what archaeological scientists believe it was. But yeah, there's some parts that are intact, but other parts we'll never know.
That's a great answer. And we do have a few more questions from chat. So just one from William. Why were the people who built these structures so interested in the position of the sun? I mean, you addressed that a little bit, but there's a second part. So did they have a specific goal in tracking the sun? Was it connected with tradition? So I think you answered part of that. Is there anything you might like to add on that?
I think that I don't have too much to add. I don't think we can, for ancient groups, you can't really detach them from each other. And the pragmatic, practical use of the sun for farming and the religious and cultural practices were entirely united, likely. They didn't separate them. This is speculation, but in likelihood, it wasn't that separated. They were considered one and the same. So it was both and equal at the same time. So I guess that was the last point I'll put on that.
Great. Yeah, so we have one more question, which I know is going to be a huge answer from Earthling, which is a great name to put on. Do you have any other examples from other hemispheres? Now, I know a bunch from Australia, and I know that archaeoastronomy, it has a lot of wonderful sites in Africa, but we can't, do you have any favorite ones maybe from other parts of the world or other Southern Hemisphere? You know what, that's a great question. And off the top of my head, I don't have anything good to answer for that. There's some great ones from Central America, but that's still from the Northern Hemisphere. So I don't think I have a great answer for that. Elena, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Well, I'm thinking mostly of a lot of the famous star sites from Aboriginal art in Australia, mostly. As you know, that there are some absolutely mind-boggling preserved sites in northern and southern, and well, actually the middle as well. So Uluru, which is the sort of very famous Central Rock in Australia. And these records go back to, they think, up to 60,000 years ago. People monitoring the brightness of Betelgeuse and doing all kinds of archaeoastronomy out there. So obviously moving to Canada from Australia, that's kind of where my brain is. But I do have a favorite one in Vermont too. So there are many. So I would say just pick anywhere in the world, you'll probably find one. Every single ancient culture, even now, every single modern culture has incredible connections to the night sky. It's obvious that it was important to us from the very beginning of humanity to measure these patterns, to understand them, to attempt to figure out what that means for us. So you go to any culture, anywhere on the planet, they were doing some kind of science to figure this stuff out. Absolutely, and it really is worth remembering. It's completely this is ancient science really, and we'll take another question here. So actually, back to Newgrange from John. Given the precession of the equinoxes, why does the Newgrange alignment still work? That's a great question. I've had that question a couple of times before. Yeah, that's because the box is the uncertainty is big enough. So if the box was created, the roof box was created so that it was just big enough for the sun to get through it right at sunrise, then at 3,200 BCE, it would have worked, but now it would not have worked because the sun would be rising in a slightly different position. But the roof box was made just at the right size so that there was enough play that the sun would still go down. We can imagine that, in fact, you could probably do the calculation and see where the sun was, and perhaps there was a longer amount of time that the sun illuminated the back chamber. But because of the precession of the equinoxes, it's now not rising perfectly in the middle, say, of the roof box. So that's a great question, but it's just uncertainty. The box is big enough for a little bit of error, I guess. Great answer. So I think, I'm not seeing new questions on chat, but I know that some of our crew actually have questions as well.
Okay, great.
So we might just have time for one or two of those, or actually three, maybe one for each person.
Let's do it.
So Shannon, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Professor Hyde. So Professor Rogerson, I have a question. In your opinion, why are ancient people so fascinated by astronomy and the sun compared to today's modern person?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes. Okay. So we are detached, and it's more than just the sky, right? Modern society. It depends on where you go and who you talk to, because this is not unilateral for all modern cultures. But we, in general, you can say that in Canada, we're quite detached from the natural world. We don't live in it the way we used to thousands of years ago. We live in houses that have nice, safe walls and keep us warm. We don't have to live with the daily and annual occurrences of the sun, the daily and annual patterns of the seasons, as much as people thousands of years ago had to do. So our detachment from those patterns is what causes this. So it's great. Like you're hitting a nail on the head here, that we as a society, we need to connect with nature more. We need to remember that this earth and these patterns, the seasons, where the sun is still really important to us. And on a broader perspective, the climate that we can now control, like humans can now to an extent have a huge impact on the climate. And so we need to remember that this climate is there, and that this natural world is there, and that we are a part of it. So we're sort of our own worst enemy. We've created all this great technology, and it has now resulted in our detachment from things. And it creates lights. We can't see our sky when we live in the city. People who live in the country still have a beautiful sky, but they don't need to worry about the patterns of the sky as much as someone in 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago had to do. So that detachment is the problem, and we need to find a way to fix it. I don't know how to do it. I mean, maybe everybody needs to camp more often. Maybe people need to go winter camping so they remember how harsh the environment can be. Whatever it is, however we learn, it is important to remember. So that's a good question.
Well, in the meantime, we'll keep doing more episodes of TeleTube.
Yeah.
Now, next up, Matt, I believe you have a question as well.
Yes, actually, yes. So my question was, how did astronomy affect the development of a civilization, and was it an important factor for expanding their curiosity towards other sciences?
So I don't know if there's probably better people on the planet that can answer that question. But I'll give my stab on it. So the question is, how does astronomy affect the advancement of?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Was it an important factor for?
Yes, because it's ancient science, right? So this was science. Basically, it's trying to create a working knowledge of the things in the sky. Like, let's say, so that we just talked about the sun today, but the sun's patterns are relatively simple in comparison to, say, the patterns of the eclipses, or the patterns of the planets. The planets are even more complex. So when an ancient civilization sits down and then works out the patterns of the sun, and they say, okay, we can predict this. We can watch the sun every day, and I can tell you exactly where it's going to be on the horizon on the sunrise of any day. Then that naturally leads to other celestial objects. They start predicting the moon. They start predicting the planets, and they deify the object, the moon as well, and the planets as well. And they got so good at, like, the ancient Mayans got so good at predicting the patterns of the sun and the moon and Venus, that they have these massive tables that you can look back on that predict exactly when eclipses were going to happen, and exactly where the Venus was going to be on the horizon on certain days. Attempting to understand the sky pushed problem solving forward, pushed scientific inquiry forward. Absolutely. And it was also one of the driving forces for having such important record keeping. So record keeping, like data analysis, is like the foundation of science, right? You collect data and then you see what the patterns are. So attempting to understand where the sun is going to be or where the moon is going to be is like this is science. They were doing science. So it pushed things forward for sure.
Absolutely, and not to mention, I'll just go ahead and put a nice word in here for celestial navigation, which was a huge part of people being able to do anything in terms of moving around the world.
Absolutely.
You know, it's that we could chat about this for hours, but we probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
Now, Gagan, I believe you have a question as well.
Yes, thank you. So in your opinion, Professor Rogerson, which ancient site is most informative or interesting to learn about with respect to archaeoastronomy?
Oh, most important? I don't know if there's, that's a tough, I don't know if I can answer that one. I don't think there's one that's more important than the other. They're all telling, they're all important. I don't know if I can pick one that's more important than the other. I think probably if you wanted to, the best way to say this would be, if you wanted to study archaeoastronomy, it would be really important to have a feeling of all ancient, that this was active science in all ancient peoples. So we were talking earlier about from around the world, like in Australia, in Africa, in South America, in the open seas, like for celestial navigation, the list goes on. Knowing that multiple groups were doing it in isolation is really important, I think, is probably the lesson that I would take from it. No, there's no single one that's more important than the other. It's important to know that we were, wherever you came from, there were groups doing it and building this knowledge in isolation.
Exactly. That's a great, maybe a good way to end off with today. We are approaching sort of the normal stopping time for these episodes, and there are many sites that you can go and look up online from all over the world, and some of them do stretch back a rather unimaginable amount of years. Of course, we did cover the I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Lascaux caves in France, which go back to about 40,000 years, and of course the Aboriginal star records, which go back to about 60,000 years, and that's you start to run into these ancient sites which really are irreplaceable. So when we talk about sort of site conservation and stuff like that, maybe that's an important thing to remember when we're looking at some of these astronomical sites, is a lot of them are tied to sort of ancient groups or sacred areas that in various locations might be having trouble getting properly protected.
And
there's that road right next to Stonehenge.
I know.
To mind.
One thing, and what I love that what you're saying about the Australian people is that they're not an ancient people. They are an ancient people, but they're also a modern people. That it's a living, like that's not only a destruction of an archaeological site, that's a destruction of a modern site. It's important to remember that, like for the Mayans as well, for the people who in Chaco Canyon, these are living people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we probably shouldn't talk too much about that because it's an ongoing, sad news item at the moment.
Absolutely.
But we should probably wrap up with a, happy note is, there are a lot of these sites to go and read about, a lot of interesting alignments. And we are just running out of time here briefly, so I'm going to go ahead and steal this back in terms of our screen share. And I'm going to go ahead and say this is probably about the time we'll wrap up our questions, and we'll go ahead and pass it back to one of our crew for the outro. Shannon, I believe this is you.
Yep, that's me. Well, everyone, you have been listening to the AICO Carswell Observatory's weekly TeleTube broadcast, the Astronomy and Astrophysics program, written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. The hosts this evening have been Gagan, Matt, and myself, Shannon, along with our guest speaker, Professor Rogerson. Thank you for joining us and for this excellent talk. Make sure to leave any comments or questions in the comments section of the video. You can always connect with us on Twitter with the handle @York Observatory, and check out our website for show notes, content, updates, and contact information, observatory.info.yorku.ca. Thanks for tuning in. Clear skies and have a good night.